Hi class, let's work through the rest of these example problems on density. It tells us, number 2 tells us the density of gold is 19.32 grams per centimeter cubed, and it asks for the volume. So it says, what is the volume? And then it says of 100 grams of gold. So this is where it gets really important to recognize what each of these units, what they are. Well, I said density is that. Okay, so I know density is given to me 19.32 grams per centimeter cubed. We want to remember our formula is D equals M over V. So I always write it in that order, D and then M. And then we have V. All right, mass is what units? Well, mass units are grams, and I have 100.0 grams. Some students will get confused and they see the word volume, so they immediately put that by V. That's not right. Grams are given. It asks, what is the volume? So volume is what I'm looking for. Okay, and I don't really know what units I'm going to have for volume, but there's a way you can check it. Look at your density. What part of that is going to be volume? Well, this part, centimeters cubed, is volume. I'm already using the grams, and centimeters cubed we know is a unit of volume. So my final units are going to be centimeters cubed because that's what my density is given in. All right, let's set up our equation. Density equals mass over volume. That's our equation. D equals M over V. So I'm just going to plug things in. Density is 19.32 equals, and then mass is 100.0 over V. Since it's unknown, I'm just going to write V like I did in the original formula. And then we're going to solve for X. We need to rearrange to solve for X. One way of doing this is I can think of this as being over 1, and I could cross multiply. The reason I would do that is because V is in the denominator, and we know in algebra you cannot solve for something in the denominator. You have to get it on the top. So you can cross multiply here. We're going to do 19.32 times V. I'm going to use a highlighter to kind of show that. 19.32 V is equal, and then we're going to cross multiply 1 times 100 gives us 100.0, okay? And then I solve for this just like I'm solving for X. If I wanted to get V by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by 19.32. That would get rid of 19.32. So I end up with V equals 100.0 over 19.32. And I get 5.176. Once again, don't forget, round to the least number of sig figs. I have 4 and 4. And my units for volume are centimeters cubed. And there we have it. That is my answer. That's the volume. All right, let's check the next one. Number 3. A 10 milliliter graduated cylinder has a mass of 89.75 grams. So if I were draw boxes around my data. I maybe would look at this and say, oh, that sounds like data. It has a mass of this, a 5 milliliter sample, and then it says the mass of the cylinder in the liquid has a mass of this. Determine the density of the liquid. That's what I'm asked for. What's the density of the liquid? Okay, now let's see if we can get organized and figure out what is what in this problem. All right, first of all, 10 milliliter graduated cylinder. That doesn't tell me anything about what I'm finding the density of. I'm not trying to find the density of the graduated cylinder. I want the density of the liquid that was in it. I don't really care what size the graduated cylinder was. That doesn't matter. It says that the graduated cylinder has a mass of 89.7 grams. Okay, that's when it's empty. And then I have a 5 milliliter sample in the graduated cylinder. Then the mass of the cylinder and the liquid, mass of the cylinder with the liquid in it is 98.46 grams. So if I want to find the mass of it, the mass of just the liquid, I would do the mass of the cylinder and the liquid minus the mass of the cylinder, because the cylinder's mass was 89.75. Okay, so we have D and M and V. We're talking about mass right now. We have 98.46 grams. That's the mass of both the liquid and the graduated cylinder, minus 89.75 grams. That's the mass of just the cylinder by itself, and if we got the difference between those, we would know the mass of just the liquid. So 98.46 minus 89.75 is going to give us 8.71, rounding to the least number of decimal places, which is 2 decimals. 8.71 grams. So that gets me mass. Now let's look at the volume. It tells us a 5.00 milliliter sample of liquid. Okay, that sounds like that's the volume of the liquid. So we're just going to write that down. 5.00 milliliters has this mass. What's the density? And that's going to be grams divided by milliliters. So I could jump straight to the assumption this is going to be grams per milliliter. Grams over milliliter. And now we'll do our equation. Again, D equals M over V. So let's write that down. Density equals, and then mass is 8.71 over 5.00. This is an easier problem than the last one because I don't have to cross multiply. So density equals, I'm just going to write that down, 8.71, or I'm going to type it in the calculator, divided by 5.00. I get 1.742. Need to round that to 3 sig figs. 1.74 grams per milliliter. All right, go down a little bit farther. Last problem. A piece of aluminum is dropped into a graduated cylinder filled with water. The volume in the cylinder rises from 25.3 milliliters to 34.8 milliliters. So there's a change. We have that when we start, then we put the object in, and that's the new volume. If I want to know the volume of the object, I would subtract these two numbers. Tells us the density of aluminum is 2.71 grams per milliliter. What's the mass of the piece of aluminum? All right, let's look at it. D, M, and V. We said our volume, we need to take the difference, 34.8 milliliters minus 25.3 milliliters. Since I just have one decimal in both of those, I need to round to one decimal. 34.8 minus 25.3, I get 9.5. Milliliters. Okay, then we get to mass. Mass is what I'm looking for. What is the mass? So what is the number of grams I'm going to end up with? And then density is 2.71 grams per milliliter. Draw our line, and then we're going to plug it into our equation. D equals M over V. 2.71 is density, equals, M is my unknown, so I'm just going to write M at the top, over, and our volume is 9.5. A few different ways to think about this problem, but the way I look at it, right now I have mass divided by 9.5, and I want mass by itself. Just like if this was x over 9.5. I want this number by itself. I want that letter by itself. If I want to get rid of 9.5, I have to do the opposite of what's happening right now. I'm dividing. Opposite of division is multiplication. So I need to multiply on both sides. So mass equals 2.71 times 9.5. And I get 25.745. I want to round to only 2 sig figs because I'm multiplying those two numbers. So my mass is going to be 26 grams. That's the final answer for that question. All right, that's it for the notes exam. All right, make sure that you also are comfortable with the practice problems that are given to you. Work through the practice and make sure that you're comfortable with it. We'll go over the practice in our next class, but you also need to have in mind we're going to have a quiz coming up in the near future. Not the next class, but coming up pretty soon. So make sure you're ready for that and ask your teacher if you have any questions.